I just whispered to God, Lord, I feel like a mom, but my arms are empty. I thought, while I'm here sitting in my grief, wallowing in my sadness, there are children who need me to do something. My exposure, it actually led me to adopting my daughter. My eldest daughter today, her name is Coco.
No matter what kind or type of mom you are, isa lang ang hangad nating lahat. To be the best mom for our kids. Because in this journey we call parenting, hindi tayo nag-iisa.
Tara, usap tayo!
Miss Chrina, kanina din, you mentioned that your loss was an instrument to your story of hope. Can you share with us what you meant about it?
You know, I'll never forget, there was one day which was really a turning point for me. It was Mother's Day after I had lost my daughter. And usually sa church, diba, parang what they do is they say, okay, we're gonna ask all the moms to stand up and, you know, let's honor our moms, diba? Parang sometimes there's flowers, diba? Or pray for the moms because it's Mother's Day. And so it was Mother's Day and I had just lost a child and I thought to myself, I do not want to go to church today because I do not want to have to face the reality of, am I a mom or am I not a mom? I felt like I was a mom on the inside, but my arms were empty. And so you remember my husband told me, I really think you should go. I think let's just go to church. It's okay, I'll sit with you. And so I thought, okay, I was really nervous. I knew it was gonna be uncomfortable for me, medyo awkward, and I didn't know how I was gonna feel. And so that Mother's Day, I went to church, and sure enough, they said, well, happy Mother's Day to all the moms, and we have flowers for the moms, and can we ask all the moms to stand up so we can give out the flowers? And I remember sitting in my seat, I started to cry. I really broke down, and I felt like I just whispered to God, Lord, I feel like a mom, but my arms are empty. It was in that time where, you know, I realized, it's like God whispered back to me, Chrina, your arms are not empty. Your arms are available. I just got this picture of cribs full of children. And in that moment, I realized that in the Philippines, there are thousands, tens of thousands of children lying in cribs today without mothers to hold them. And my arms were empty, and they were longing for a mother to hold them. It was like my grief shrunk a little bit. My personal grief shrunk, and it was overcome by this grief that a child sitting in a crib, I can't imagine the feeling of being an infant in a crib, not knowing if a mother will ever hold me. That if I long to hold a child, I can't imagine the pain and the trauma of a child wondering whether a mother will ever love them. That they have absolutely no power to change their situation. I thought, while I'm here sitting in my grief, wallowing in my sadness, there are children who need me to do something. It kind of jolted me out of the grief, and I started to look around, and that's really where my journey into starting the work of Rohei Foundation started. I started to visit children's homes and see, you know, what's going on? Why are all these children here? Why are all the orphanages in the Philippines operating at full capacity? Why are they all full? When was the last adoption? Bakit ang tagal? Diba? Parang, why are there so many kids? And how come I can only think of a handful of families who have adopted? There were so many gaps. And I was looking at, you know, the system, and I was saying there are a few things we can do here. We need to help families understand the realities that adoption is a beautiful way to build your family. That child in that crib is no more precious than the child that I lost. God loves that baby as much as He loves the child that went to heaven, you know, my daughter. And I think that reality really set me up for this work. I started to set up the foundation. I started to look into what we could do to help families adopt, to make it easier, to simplify the process, to make it more accessible, to help them understand the need, that orphanages are not a solution. They're meant to be temporary, and yet we leave children there their whole lives. And because of that, my exposure, it actually led me to adopting my daughter. My eldest daughter today, her name is Coco.
Yeah.
And that led to actually her becoming part of our family.
So, gaano katagal, Miss Chrina, yung nag-decide kayo na, okay, we're gonna adopt?
Adoption was not something that was a new conversation piece for my husband and I. We had always kind of talked about it, not very, very seriously. Maybe we had seen a few videos, and you know when you're on YouTube and there are all these videos like an adoption story and you would cry because it's so moving. It's really, they're very inspirational and emotional. And so we would see those and we'd think, wow, what a beautiful story. And yeah, maybe one day. Ganun lang. Only to that point.
So you're just open about it?
We were just open, but didn't have any concrete plans. But in that season, we started to say, okay, because I was so moved and drawn towards this work around orphaned and vulnerable children, we started to really have those conversations. So maybe a year of that. Really just talking about it and saying, what do you think about this? Would we be open? Do we think that's something we could do? Then at some points you'd be like, oh, maybe later. Maybe after we have more biological kids, when they're all grown up, maybe then. So the conversation was always on the table for us. And we just had to be ready for when it was the right time.
So nung time na yun, you were already running the Rohei Foundation?
At that time, we were starting the work. I think that was when we were really setting up the groundwork, registering the foundation, figuring out exactly what need we were going to address when it comes to the orphan crisis in the Philippines. We had to figure out where exactly we were going to position ourselves. And so in that time, we also had to have personal, the family conversations about what does this mean for us.
So, Ms. Chrina, nung time na to, what were the factors that you considered when you planned on adopting?
Well, one, we wanted to make sure that we were not trying to replace the child we lost. That's why we were so deliberate about the grieving process, because we didn't want it to feel like, okay, we lost one and so let's replace that child through adoption, because you really can't do that, diba? So we first took the time to grieve so that we wouldn't feel that when we were ready for adoption, we knew we're gonna love this child for who she is and not as a way of replacing what was lost. And I don't even think that's possible, diba? Parang you can't replace the child that you lost. So that's one. The other one, questions that families ask are like, is now the right time? Some people say that, okay, maybe when my kids are older, after I have biological kids. Or sometimes they mistakenly say, is after I have kids of my own. Which now, as an adoptive mom, I know my daughter who I adopted is my own. She's mine. I'm her real mom. We're careful not to say that. And I realized that was kind of a silly thing to think about also, because that means you're distinguishing whether there's something different about your adopted child and there's something different about your biological child. Now, when I look at my kids, they're just my kids. I mean, yes, Chloe has a story, Coco has a story, but they're not different. I love them all the same. We had to wrestle with some of that. Some of the questions are like, will I be able to love a child who is not genetically my own or doesn't have the same DNA or the same blood as me, right? I think those are the questions. I think you have to go through the hard questions and process that and answer them for yourself and be able to wrestle through that so that you can really enter into adoption with a fully opened heart to this child, that you would be able to love this child fully.
So, parang maganda, yung purpose of adoption is just to really love the child. Ang kinin mo talaga siya. Not just because to replace another child. Kasi may mga misconceptions din about adoption, Miss Chrina, di ba? So, what are your thoughts about it? Yun nga, kagaya ng sabi nila na, ay, nag-ampon lang yan kasi hindi mag-anak. Ay, nag-ampon lang yan kasi ganito. So, what are your thoughts about it?
Or, it's so hard, di ba? Ganun nga. Or they'll say, oh, sige, mag-ampon ka na lang. But actually, it's like saying that this is not as special, or since you can't have a biological child, then sige, plan B, diba? Or last resort, why don't you just adopt? But actually, the way we see adoption and now knowing what it's like to have a child who came to me through adoption, it's just another way of building your family. Just as it would be to have a biological child and to plan for another pregnancy, you can plan to bring a child into your family through adoption. And when I look at my kids, I look at Chloe, I think I actually have a very special love for Chloe. I think, wow, the mountains that had to move for you and me to be together, for you to become part of our family, the many miracles that had to happen. And I don't look at her and think, none of this could have happened by accident. I think it's just important to know that it's just a way of building your family. Not to overcomplicate that, not to make it seem like it's the last resort. My encouragement to families is, even if you can biologically conceive, just to think about it. Sometimes you've just never asked the question, it's just never crossed your mind. We just think about biological kids. But actually, especially here in the Philippines, Filipino children really need Filipino families. you know. A lot of them get adopted internationally because there aren't many Filipino families that want to adopt them. Our hope is that Filipino children would also be able to be adopted by Filipino families because the adjustment to your new family is already so great. And then you couple that with a new culture, a new language, right? They have so many adjustments when they're adopted internationally. Well, my hope is that, you know, families here would just be a bit more open and just ask that question, diba? Something to talk about with your family or with your kids to just see, baka open ba tayo? Parang is it something we could consider just the way we consider having another child, another baby?
So, Miss Chrina, nung time na to, marami ka pa rin bang ibang misconception na narinig? Like, can you tell us?
So many misconceptions. Is it hard? Yes, it's hard. But is it as scary as I think what happens because of media, especially yung mga telenovelas natin, medyo na-heighten yung rebellious adopted child, yung ganong klaseng characters in media and in stories that we see. Or unfortunately, when you search the word orphan, right, online, sabi ko, bakit ang daming horror story? Diba? Or parang, why are there so many scary stories that we put out there, narratives that we create around a child who is an orphan, when really, that's not really the reality. And so I think it's important to get close and get familiar with really the real stories of adoption. Get in touch with the adoption communities in the Philippines and the stories of what it's really like, because there's so much false news, fake news about what it could be like to bring in an adopted child. The trauma, the rebelde, the, you know, all of that. Na mas na-heighten ng media natin.
Oo nga, no, na-realize ko kasi parang kino-connect natin yung parang negative doon sa orphan.
Yes.
So yung parang magkadikit siya.
Yeah.
'Di ba?
But actually, 'di ba, parang sometimes rebellion, for example, all teenagers go through a season of rebellion.
Yes.
And it just so happens that because this child came to this family through adoption, you blame it on the adoption. No, they're just being a teenager or they're just being a child.
Yeah.
Nagtatantrum, bakit? Kasi bata siya.
Correct.
Hindi dahil inampon mo siya. Nagtatantrum siya kasi bata siya.
Yes.
And so sometimes we connect it too much. And so really just being able to figure out, you know, you actually, parents who adopt have the ability to love this child back to health, back to life.
Miss Chrina, si Chloe, she's 4 na, right?
Yes.
Alam niya ba na adopted siya?
Yeah, she does. So actually we told her the day she came to us. Even though we adopted her as a baby.
Yes.
I think we were very deliberate that we wanted to make sure she knew her story. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't hidden from her and that it was something she could be proud of, because we're proud of that. We feel very honored that we got to be her parents and we wanted her to know that. Actually, the hard part, I guess, is like it's actually harder on the parents than it is on the child. This whole talking about adoption topic. So for us, it was awkward at first, which is why it's good to start when they're babies, because then they're babies, no reaction. And the practice is really for the parents to get comfortable talking about it, to get comfortable bringing up the topic. And I wanted to make sure that if she had any questions, she would not go to Google or to Facebook. One day, I wanted her to come to me. So I wanted her to know that if you have questions about adoption, you can ask me. I'm here to answer your questions. We're here to talk about it. And so we get a lot of questions these days. And she's very well aware of her story.
So, Miss Chrina, would you suggest ba na sabihin doon sa mga adopted child that they are adopted?
Yeah. Actually, now in the Philippines with the new domestic adoption law, RA 11642, it's actually in the law that you need to tell your child before the age of 13 that they were adopted, because when you keep something like that a secret, the message you send to your child is that I'm hiding something about you. There was something about you that I didn't want you to know. And to a child, that can be very hurtful to discover at the age of 16 or 17 or 18 or 25 or 30, right? And sometimes that's the reality. And so I think this new law really helps encourage families, you know, to say, I know it's hard, I know it's uncomfortable, I know awkward siya for the parents, but encourages us to have that conversation, because we owe that to our child. That's part of who they are. A child needs to know who they are. That's part of them coming into their own identity and discovering who they are, and hiding that from them would really be unfair.
That's right.
Yeah.
What if one day, kapag nandun na siya sa tamang age, hanapin niya yung biological parents niya, what would you feel? And papaano mo to i-deal?
Well, we're ready for that, and I hope she would. My hope is that one day, if she wants to reach out and if she wants to look for them, we'll fully support that. I know that sometimes the fear kasi of an adoptive parent is, if hanapin nila yung biological mom nila, does that mean iiwan nila ako? Diba?
Yes,
Parang,
yes,
are they
yes.
gonna leave me? And of the hundreds of adoptees that get asked this, the question is always, no, of course not. You're my mom. You're my real mom. And I think, when you're deliberate and you build trust with your child, you've told them the truth, and you've walked with them and you've loved them as your own, then they have no reason to leave you. It's just curiosity sometimes. A lot of the adoptees we talk to who are older, in their 20s, 30s, will say, yeah, I went through a season where I really wanted to meet my biological mom and I tried to find her and I didn't, but that's okay, at least I tried. It was just wanting to put in sometimes the effort and the curiosity. And so it's not really a bad thing. It's just wanting to understand who they are. And especially in the teen years, all teenagers go through that.
Yes.
And so if Coco wants to do that one day, we would have to support her and we would need to be there with her. And I wouldn't want her to do it alone. I would want to be there with her. And so that's why we have these conversations. Kasi pagdating nung time na yun, gusto ko, she's open with me.
Yes.
I want her to know that she can talk. She's not afraid to bring it up with me.
What if it's the other way around? Yung biological parents, yung nag-reach out to you na gusto nilang makilala yung bata?
Yeah, well, because of the work that I do, I know that that's actually not possible. So when a child is surrendered for adoption, and after a child has gone through the legal adoption process, the biological parents, all of their rights have been terminated. And so initiating, being able to meet and reconnecting is always on the adoptees. It's always on the adoptee side and the adoptive family side. So the biological family is not able to really initiate anything.
I see. So parang talagang wala na din talaga silang rights to look. Kasi
So,
diba nangyayari sa,
fully
like for example, KMJS, merong mga naghahanapan and all. Pag si adoptee na yung naghanap.
Yeah, so the adoptee can initiate, right? And sometimes the agencies, the CPA, the Child Placement Agency that they worked with, or DSWD, the NACC, can really help facilitate that process. And usually, that organization, whether it's the government or whether it's a CPA like us, we're the ones that stay in contact with the biological families. So that kung gusto nila mag-reach out, they tell us.
Yes.
And we'll see. But there's no direct contact between the biological families and the adoptive
So,
family.
hindi nila alam.
Because they've terminated their rights.
So hindi nila alam kung sino yung nag-adopt dun sa baby.
No. Although
They
I
have
think
no
that
idea.
happens in the Philippines, diba? Because of minsan direct placements, pinapaalaga, and then they get adopted sometimes that way. But if you go through the full regular adoption process, that's not how it works. Yeah. So the way it works is you have to apply, and then you get matched to a child, and only after you're matched to a child can you either accept that child or not.
Paano kayo i-match? Anong process? Sorry, ang dami kong tanong. So, paano yung process ng matching and
Yeah, so you apply to be an adoptive family, right? And through the application process, they get to know you. And for example, they get to know your family, your preference. Do you want a boy or a girl? Or can you handle special needs? Can you handle any medical conditions? Or not? And then age. Do you want a 7-year-old or a 2-year-old? Or, so they get to know your preferences and they take your file to the matching process. So there's DSWD holds a matching conference monthly, regularly, sometimes twice a month. And they take your file and then they look at all the children that are in children's homes, may files yan, presented for adoption. And they look for a match. So is there a match? And do any of these childs available meet the criteria? And if so, they'll present that case to you and say, okay, Mommy Julie, would you be open to adopting this child? And then
hindi
you
mo
can say
pa
yes or no.
makikita ng personal yung bata?
Not yet. Yeah.
Papers pa lang or
Yeah,
ano?
because it's to prevent child trafficking. Because what would happen is families would walk into a children's home and then ano yung gagawin? Pipiliin yung pinaka-cute.
That's right.
Or, unfortunately, they base it on looks. And that's how some children end up not getting adopted.
That's true.
And if a family's intention was really to adopt, was really purely to love this child, then sana the biological attributes, the physical attributes wouldn't have been the deciding factor. It's also to test the intentions of the adopting family.
Is it just for the Rohei Foundation na parang sistema or sa buong...
That's our national system. That's how adoption is in the
So
Philippines.
guys, yung mga napapanood natin, nararamdaman ko na ano siya magiging anak ko. It's not true pala. Meron pala talagang process.
Yeah.
So hindi sila makikita yung bata.
Yeah, it's not healthy, and I think it also helps test the intentions of the adopting
that's true.
family. Kasi kung hindi ka na naman talaga ready, huwag ka na lang mag-adopt. Kung gusto mo lang ng cute na baby.
Ay, oo. Miss Chrina, last question na lang. What's the difference between fostering and adopting?
Okay, that's a really good question. Well, I'm really excited about fostering in the Philippines because it's something that is fairly new, and fostering is actually the temporary care of a child who needs a family. Adoption is permanent, it's binding. You get issued a new birth certificate with your name on it, and it's forever. It cannot be returned to its original state. That's not how it was designed, right? You don't want that to ever happen. It's permanent, it's binding. Foster care is usually temporary. It could be for a time frame. And so there are a lot of children in the Philippines that sometimes need temporary care because either their families are not capable at the time being to care for them, or their papers are not yet ready for adoption, so they need a temporary family. But it's the importance of family because family is so critical to the development of a child, diba? Parang if not sa institution sila lumalaki. They grew up in a children's home and an orphanage, which was never the design for kids. Their development is automatically stunted. Their brains are automatically smaller simply because they grew up in an institution. And so family-based care is still the best for them. So that's fostering. So some families who are saying, hey, actually, we can actually help take care of another child. They can foster for a season, a few months, a year, and really be able to help the kids that way.
So dito sa Philippines, meron na tayong fostering.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Parang ito yung sa mga films, sa mga Hollywood,
It's usually
diba?
in the States, right? We
Oo.
see all the stories of foster care, and yeah, we have it now in the Philippines, and I think we're really trying to encourage a lot of families to get a license. Basically, you need a license to foster. And then the child can be placed with you for a certain amount of time, and then, if you feel that time needs to end, or that child no longer needs a placement, then that child will either reunified with their family or move on to their adoptive family.
Possible ba, Miss Chrina, like, foster parent ka, pero after mo makasama yung bata, gusto mo na din siyang i-adopt?
If the child becomes available for adoption, that's possible, right? So there's just no assurance that the child you're fostering will eventually be adoptable. But yes, I mean, it's possible. I think there are lots of stories where that happens. And eventually, if it's in the best interest of that child to stay with you, bakit mo pa siya tatanggalin and dadalhin sa iba?
Yes, correct.
Diba? Parang kung nag-bond na siya and that child is attached already to your family, then there's no reason to uproot that child and move them.
Ayun nga, nung sinabi ni Miss Chrina na family is very important to the child kasi isa sa mga needs ng mga bata is love and affection. So, kung lumaki sila ng institution, of course, sobrang dami nila. Hindi naman maibibigay ito, di ba? So, magandang bagay nga yung fostering, di ba?